All right, welcome to a new episode of Jung Naiv. I got a new guest. Who are you?
Well, my name is Zikode. I am the president of the Shack Dwellers Movement of South Africa, Abahlali, baseMjondolo. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. What are shack dwellers, Sibu?
Well, shack dwellers are people who are living in a very difficult circumstances. They are living in shack settlements, what people normally refer to as slums, which is not really a term that is acceptable to the people who are living in these conditions. So shack dwellers are actually people who are landless, who are homeless, who have been forced to build what they call home for themselves in a very difficult circumstances. It's just a community in a way that is denied basic services, that is denied the right to the city and other basic services that any human right ought to have.
And there's a movement for these people, of these people?
Yes, well,
you're the leader of them.
I am the elected leader of this group of people. It's actually a grassroots democratic organization of the shack dwellers and the impoverished in South Africa that is really fighting for the right to land, the right to decent housing, but also the right to dignity as other human beings.
We're going to talk about all that. I mean, I read that there are 60 million people living in South Africa. How many shack dwellers are there?
Well, about 12 million people
12 million
are living in substandard conditions. In one city that I come from, Durban, has about 3.5 million population in my city. And out of that, at least 800,000 people live in the informal settlement, in shack settlements. That is without, better shelter that is decent.
Have they always been living like this, or are they too poor to live like in an apartment? What are the reasons for living in a shack?
Well, we have a history. We come from the history of colonialism. We come from the history of apartheid. It's only in 1994 that South Africa gained political freedom. So we are like 29 years into democracy. Before that, Black South Africans were not allowed to migrate to cities. They were not allowed to participate in the democratic dispensation of the country. It was only in 1994 when there was the first democratic election that included Black people who were otherwise denied. So from 1994, migration and urbanization, from people coming from the countryside, from the rural areas, going to the cities, it was only open. So then our cities are unable to accommodate the influx of people coming to the city. So the answer to you is that they are too poor to have apartment, to have decent housing. But not only that they are poor, but they are denied by the current system the right to have access to better homes that are decent to them.
Why are they denied these living conditions?
Well, there's a structural system and why they are denied. But it is important also to mention that in South Africa, there's high rate of unemployment, especially for young people. Almost 74% of young people remain unemployed.
70%?
At least of young people who are...
70?
70.
Wow.
It's as bad as that. So young people are really hopeless, and it is for that reason why poverty is so much. So there's deep poverty, there's deep inequality. As you would understand that South Africa is one of the most unequal society in the world.
Really? Why?
Well, I guess it's because of the economic policies that we've chosen as a country. The policies that actually puts profit before human needs, that puts money. And again, I think it is also important for the listeners to note that 87% of our land in South Africa is owned by few white farmers, particularly white commercial farmers, owns 80% of our land. And the majority of the country, which is largely black people, only owns 13% of our land. So that's the problem.
So private land is mainly owned by a white minority?
White minority, mostly commercial farmers. They own the larger part of our land.
Why is that?
Well, it is exactly that history of apartheid where...
Well, you overcame apartheid, so how come the ownership is still in the hands of mostly white people?
Interesting question. That's what we thought. We thought 1994 when we voted for the first time and elected legitimately black majority government. And we thought that was the real freedom. And we just discovered that we only received the political freedom, not even the wider political rights, but just the right to vote. That's all we have. That is why the challenges that we had during apartheid remains. It is unfortunately that we feel as South Africans that the struggle of the South African population has been betrayed by those that are in power currently. And we were blaming color, that white minority were oppressing us. Today we are being oppressed by the black majority government. It is unbelievable that our own government that was meant to save the largest population of the country is the one that is actually oppressing us.
Okay, the obvious question is, okay, you formally overcame apartheid in 1994. Nelson Mandela became president. The ANC got into power. I think they're still in power, right? It was a movement for black people for overcoming apartheid. Why hasn't the ANC changed the, let's call it, economic apartheid in South Africa?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that have been the one of the first goals?
Of course. That's why we are all ashamed to be answering such question and to be having such a conversation in a democratic South Africa. Of course, the aspirations of Nelson Mandela and those who led the ANC at that time had a different view about the future South Africa. Right now, those who have taken over, now Mandela is gone. Unfortunately, the current ANC have failed the people of South Africa. The current ANC has also failed Nelson Mandela himself. So if he were to be walking in his grave, he would be very angry about the South Africa that has become, the South Africa that is now oppressing its people. Now the ANC has become an oppressor, just like how the apartheid did. You know, organizations, social movements, grassroots formations that are organizing on the ground to realize the very fight that Nelson Mandela led are now being oppressed.
Why would you say the ANC has failed? You guys has failed. Mandela himself, like.
Well, the ANC is in power.
Yes.
It is the government of the day.
Yeah.
It is the government that refuse to listen to the people on the ground.
Why?
They are now enriching themselves at the expense of ordinary men and women of South Africa. They have become a movement.
Are they corrupt?
Well, to a large extent, there is high state corruption. There has been a number of commission, and one of the famous commission on corruption and state capture has been known as the Zondo Commission, where basically the state enterprises have now been hijacked by gangster, to say so. So we are seeing a lot of state corruption in government under the nose, and many of the high-ranking officials of the ANC, senior leaders, as we speak, are being prosecuted for alleged corruption. So this is what we are confronted with, that the leaders that are supposed to be the custodians of our constitutional democracy are the ones that are actually enriching themselves and just neglect the project of what Nelson Mandela used to call the Rainbow Nation and the government of national unity.
Well, the obvious question is, if people generally know that about the ANC, that they're enriching themselves, that they're maybe corrupt, why don't people vote for a different party?
Well, it is the same conversation that is going on and on, especially at this point in time. South Africa is heading for its general election next year. Those are the kinds of conversation that we are having. And for some reasons, and I think a lot of people had a feeling that if they were to vote for somebody else, they would actually be betraying Mandela himself. So people have been voting with their heart. They feel that they owe the ANC something. They remain kind of loyal to the ANC. But they are now realizing they are learning every day as they continue to live in deep poverty, as they see their money get stolen every day, as they see the challenges that South Africa continues to face under the administration of the ANC, they are now realizing. But another point is that there isn't really alternative party that the people of South Africa has really seen as an alternative.
Is there no opposition, like in
Of
parliament?
course, there are opposition parties. There are opposition parties, but opposition parties have not really been able to respond and to demonstrate that they can actually do better the ANC. So what we're seeing right now, opposition just means that the ANC has to be taken out, but without providing an alternative. What is it that you are going to do better from the ANC if the ANC was to be taken out tomorrow? So we don't have any strong opposition that articulating the needs of the poor and the working class in the country.
How's that? Why is that? I mean, there are 30 years of rule almost of the ANC. Why are there not new movements, new parties who are like, okay, we need to avoid these mistakes. We need to get these corrupt people out of power. That's what democracy is for.
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. Of course, there is that conversation going on, and there is a lot expected to change in this particular election, particularly that small parties may come into build a coalition government. This is what South Africa is likely to head to because the vote of the ANC is dropping on a daily basis. They have lost metros, big cities in the country. They've lost a number of trusts. They are no longer the vehicle that the ordinary people of South Africa can use to bring about change that they require.
Could the ANC be changed from within? Like people like you, like who are go into the party and be like, okay, this is like a democratic party. Let's change it from within.
Well, that has been a conversation that has been going on for the past 10 years. It's a conversation within the ANC. There was people that still believe that the ANC could renew itself. They talk about the renewal of the ANC. But that project has dismally failed, because there are people within the ANC who are not really about the people, who have absolutely no love for their country, no love for people. They are just there to eat for themselves. Some of our cities, I can tell you, they have been hijacked by mafias and gangster politicians who have no care, absolutely no love for their country, but just to eat, enrich for themselves. And sometimes they even tell us on our faces that it is our turn to eat, and we're going to eat for you, and we're going to eat on your behalf. So they fight amongst themselves as to who would be eating the next. So they have turned our beautiful country into a joke, just a project of eating. That's what is going on in South Africa.
Have you ever been a member of the ANC? Like, were you a believer in the Mandela days, maybe? Were you naive?
Oh, no, of course. I did believe. The ANC was a good party with a good intention. It was led by principled people who, unfortunately, are no longer leading the ANC. Many of them have passed on, and unfortunately left the ANC to the leaders who do not have moral grounds. So we have a serious ethical and moral problems within the leaders that are really, even those that are good leaders, have no influence within the party. Even in government, not to say everyone is corrupt, not to say everyone is bad, but those good people are good for nothing because they fail to influence, they fail to clean the ANC, they fail to get rid of corruption in governance and other institutions.
How do the corrupt part of the ANC, How do they do that? Like to avoid the change from within? Like, why are they so powerful, so successful in avoiding that? Like, do they pay people off, or do they threaten them or something?
Well, a lot is happening. If I were to make an practical example with my city, the city of Durban, so beautiful the city is, right now as we speak, the former mayor and her entire administration is being prosecuted. They are in and out courts for stealing the money that has been earmarked for providing sanitation in the informal settlement in a city unit called Durban Solid Waste. This is part of the city that has to make sure that the city is able to deal with its waste management, but also provide water and sanitation to the poorest of the poor. So the infrastructure is collapsing. Now, this is the entire administration. So this is not just, I am aware that I may be making strong allegations, but if you go to South Africa right now, the former mayor, the former city manager, senior administration executive committee members are in and out the court. It happens in other cities. It has become normal.
Do they face jail time? Like, what happens if they are successfully, if the rule of law says, okay?
Well, these are criminal charges. They are facing jail times, spending jail times in prison. That's how bad it is.
That's good. So new people can...
Yes, so we welcome that, and we think it's a good step for our justice system to really pass a message to others, to those who are still corrupt, to know that the consequences of corruption, you may end up in jail. So this is a very good step. We have not seen it happening, but it is happening right now on our faces, and it will send a very good lessons, because after all, the money has been stolen from the poor people who are languishing in deep poverty. It is the money that is supposed to be uplifting the communities. It is the money that is supposed to be creating jobs that is now being stolen by the people who are already privileged, who are powerful. So it's corruption. So they use money also to buy people, to buy votes, and to be influential. There's that power of money. But using power, as the positions that are given to them, and abuse their positions and state resources to actually build their own empires, and makes it difficult or even impossible to face prosecution as they face now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that people could actually go to jail for being a corrupt politician. In Germany, sometimes when there are corruption trials, very few politicians face jail time. So it's good to hear that the rule of law is working. Like, do you have trust in the rule of law in South Africa? Or are there corrupt judges?
Well, there's mixed emotions, but right now we have confidence, but we also know that when you are rich, when you are a high-ranking politicians, you can easily get away with crimes that we know.
Just like in the West.
Just like in the West, of course.
The richer you are, the more likely it is to avoid jail time.
Exactly, that's the situation. But we are yet to see to what extent our law becomes just, to everyone.
It sounds like you have a huge problem with greed. This seems to be one of the reasons for this corrupt behavior of politicians.
Absolutely. There is intentionally a deliberation of not wanting to improve the lives of ordinary South Africans. Our infrastructures are collapsing. The money that is meant, to do that. I mean, just a week ago, we read on the newspapers that another 32 million rand earmarked for housing, to house the homeless, has gone missing. the money that was meant for floods relief, we had a huge floods that took lives in South Africa in April last year. People are still, living in community halls. They are still living, waiting for government to really respond to their homelessness as a result of floods. They remain in those conditions because somebody has decided that they do not deserve the money, and the money has just gone missing. Mm-hmm. It's now normal in South Africa that if you are powerful, you are a politician, you are a businessman, you can always steal from the poor and just get away with crimes.
Is the problem that it's so easy for these politicians to steal the money? Are there not enough rules to avoid that?
Well,
I mean, how can it be that money disappears?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a joke, but it's on the headlines of many newspapers in South Africa as we speak. And it happens in the watch of the opposition parties. And we ask ourselves, what's the point of having opposition parties in city council, in parliament, when the money can easily get lost? Mm-hmm. Those are the questions that we are asking ourselves as communities, as organizations, outside the state. We continue to see theft, we continue to see greed, we continue to see people becoming stinking rich, while some are really getting stinking poor. That's what we are confronted with in our so-called new democracy.
Let's talk about you until we dive deep into all these topics. You come from Durban.
Yes, I come from the city of Durban, mm-hmm. Which is in KwaZulu-Natal. It's a beautiful area. It has, of course, nice people. There's hope outside the state.
When were you born? In the 70s?
Yes, I was born in the 70s, yeah.
What did your parents do?
Well, I was raised by a single mom, mm-hmm. who was a domestic worker. And
domestic worker means?
Well, she was just working for a family, for a white family, okay. In a small town called Escort. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in a very rural area, in a countryside, where there wasn't any infrastructure, and it remains as poor as it were. And at school, there was no career guidance for that matter. So I had to migrate to the city in the 90s for my university degree, because again, there aren't institutions of high learnings in rural areas, and it remains like that. And the situation, it looks like it's going to continue, because a lot of politicians come from these rural areas, and they are not willing to invest back in those rural areas. So for South Africa, in order for you to have a better future, you have to embark in urbanization, embark in migration, leave your poverty-stricken community and come to the city. And when you get to the city, our cities are unable to accommodate the influx of people coming into the cities. Not just urbanization from rural areas, but like other cities throughout around the world, there's so much migration that is happening, and then we find that our cities then do not have infrastructure that is sufficient to welcome everyone coming to city, and there isn't enough job for everyone. There aren't enough apartment and housing for everyone coming to the cities.
Let's get back to your childhood. You were raised by a single mother. How did you grow up with her working probably all the time? Like, did she take you with her? Like, who raised you while she was working?
Interesting question. Wow. Well, my mom was very brave. She remains brave. She had to be courageous to leave us with other families. You know, in an African culture, you can have a child, but that child gets raised by the entire village.
It takes a village.
It takes a village, but we also have extended family members. So I'll remain with other aunts, with her sisters, with her cousins, my malumes, the uncles. They have actually raised me while she was working. So I was a child of a broader family. And of course, I was raised by the entire village.
Were you a Czech dweller as a kid?
I was a rural.
You guys ever had an apartment or a place?
Yeah, to describe
like with running water, electricity?
No, that's privileged. Where I grew up, even today, it's hard to have access to clean water and sanitation. Even today, 29 years of our democracy in the country.
In 2023.
In 2023. In rural areas, there's hardly access to infrastructure. So there was no running water. We used to fetch water in the rivers, streams, and we would drink water with animals, cows and goats, because there was no infrastructure. And that situation remains. So I wasn't born a shack dweller. I was born a rural boy, a rural young man. Only in the 90s when I migrated to the city and I thought I was going to have a better life. But of course, that's where I came across with shack settlement, which many people know it as slums. But of course, we do not want to use that word because it really undermines people. So then when I could not afford apartment in the city, poverty won me and I had to find myself a shack to rent. That's how I became a shack dweller myself, because I wanted to be closer to the city. I did not come to the city to create chaos. I did not come to the city to build shacks or to be a leader of shack dwellers. I came to the city like many ordinary young men who aspire to go to the city of Johannesburg, the city of Cape Town, when they finish their matrics, because there aren't universities or colleges in these rural areas. So once you finish your matric, anyone would want to go to the city because that's the only places where you can find universities. There are only places where you can find better hospitals and other infrastructure, that would be useful for any person to have a better life. So that's how I came to the city. I did not just come to be a shack dweller. I came to study. Many people come to study. Many people come to find employment in the city. And when they cannot find that or unable to afford that, then they will occupy vacant and unused land and start building shacks. And that's what they call home for themselves.
Back to your childhood, like kids in Germany, they go to school when they're 6 years old. Were you sent to school like when you were 6? Like, how did that work?
I was pretty older when I got to school.
Older?
Yeah. I think I was 7. Yes. And of course, those days were really terrible days for us. Remember, the administration of the country was still under apartheid. So many people could not even go to school because we were involved in the struggle. Some were told, and there was a clear instruction in South Africa that struggle now, education later. That is why it's really been difficult for us to really meet with modern standard technology and so on, because at the time when we were supposed to study, we were involved in war in the country. Against apartheid, of course, yeah.
Was your school segregated? Like, did you only have black students?
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. There were laws that were made by the apartheid government, which really deliberately created segregation. There were places that were white only even going to the bathrooms, there will be a sign that says white only. You dare enter there. That's what South Africa looked like. But at that time, obviously, rural areas were just black areas where there's no infrastructure. And of course, when the apartheid government thought at least black people could come to the city, then they started created townships, villages of only black people, villages of only Indian people, villages of the so-called colored people, and villages of white people. Even that pattern remains as it is in South Africa. But of course, when you have money, you can go into those to those beautiful areas with all the infrastructure because you have money. Of course, it's no longer a color question. It's one of the things I could say the democratic government achieved in 1994. But those structures have not really been dismantled. So they are still visible if you go to South Africa. There are areas, not that you cannot go there, but you cannot afford to go there.
As a kid, when and how, maybe you remember, did you realize that there's apartheid? That the white people in South Africa are empowered. Did your mom tell you? How did you realize it as a kid that black people like you, are second class?
Interesting question. Well, I remember very vividly as a kid, from time to time, we will visit my mom and actually play with the kids of her bosses, of her employers.
Yes, the white family.
The white family. And when we played as a kid, of course, kids are kids. They are innocent. They didn't know, didn't understand what apartheid was or discrimination was. We will play as a kid. But that's when I was conscious that these kids were well off. All of them had bikes, for instance. And we have to play with these kids. And they are friendly. They are open for us to play with them. But then I started asking questions. We don't have this privilege. You could see the house of the employer, so beautiful. It has all the comfort that the kids will enjoy. They have toys. As a kids, I did not have that privilege. I did not have toys. So, and of course, these kids were generous enough to share this. But again, mom was the only black person working in this family. And of course, you could see her working until late, as if she does not have blood. Of course, her employers would be very friendly. But as a kid, I realized that she was working too much, up and down, as if she's really an animal of some sort.
7 days a week?
7 days a week, yes, absolutely. My mom would not have a day off, even at night. After dinner, she would still be expected to go and wash dishes. But the second scenario at school,
did you ask your mom how that is, that white people are privileged? And what did she tell you?
Well, of course, one would have those conversations as a kid, but mom would not want to dwell, on that. For her, she saw herself lucky, fortunate, at least that she had a job, that at least her kids can eat, that at least at the end of the month, she can have something for her kids, for her family, which of course was not enough. But even at that time, a lot of people were not employed. And I think as poor as we were, but we also felt privileged in a sense that mom was working, and as kids we were able to visit these white kids, which were really welcoming, helping us to understand, to navigate life, share their toys, share their bikes. I remember the employer of my mom had to actually buy me a bike. Whether she felt I really needed a bike as a kid, or maybe she felt that I was really not making it comfortable for her kids, because the kids are like sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot tell that. But coming from that poor family and be able to have a bike, ride a bike, taking this bike back into my rural area, and I was seen as privileged because other kids don't have a bike.
But you shared it with them.
I shared it with them because so those are the scenarios of growing in South Africa. Yeah, at that time, really, it was nobody from outside had told me about politics. It was just a self-realization of the inequality.
You want to talk about the school part?
Oh, yes. At school, as a kid, I was lucky that I was introduced into a Boy Scouts association.
Mm-hmm.
My salute goes to the late sister Angela Majola, who actually introduced me into a Boy Scouts association.
What is that?
Boy Scouts movement, for some reason, is an association. I think it's the worldwide an association that is dedicated into building boys into real responsible men. In Boy Scouts, you are shaped to become a better man. You are shaped, you are trained, leadership is installed in your vein, you become responsible. You are taught how to love your country, the importance of really loving humanity and taking responsibility. I remember we were taught the Scout Promise, which I still remember. In fact, what I am today has been shaped by the Boy Scouts movement. The Scout Promise, for instance, will say, "On my honor, I promise that I will do my best to do my duty to God and to my country, to help other people at all times, and to obey the Scout law." I was raised and shaped by these principles. Duty to God, duty to my country, duty to my world. I'm not surprised that I am here today because I have a duty, the responsibility. So at the Boy Scout movement, we will go out as young boys. And of course, Boy Scouts was founded by Lord Baden-Powell, who realized that when boys were alone without girls, were free.
It's also kind of a segregation, right? Like segregating girls from boys.
Absolutely. But the thing is, the boys learn better when they are themselves. Well, the question of segregation and sex is another. But you will be confident, learning with other boys. You will not be shy, for instance.
Okay.
For some reason, girls make you shy. They are powerful. That's why they make you feel small. That's how we respect women. So we would then go out for camps. You learn tricks. You learn responsibility. We will cook, for instance, without cooking utensils. At the camps, you will really be taught to be very creative. But there were moments where we would go to what they call a jamboree, which is really an exciting gathering of the Boy Scouts from around, whether nationally or from around the world. And that's where you also meet Girl Guides now. So in this jamboree, that's when I actually met white friends. And in the Boy Scouts Association, there was no discrimination.
Oh.
I started
even during apartheid.
At that time, because there were moments, of course, when boys would be brought together, and there were exciting moments. We could create friends, and we would even live with contacts and still be in contacts. But I do not understand where those white boys came from. because that didn't change what was happening in South Africa and at that time. It almost felt like they were coming from outside the country, because young boys didn't understand politics. They didn't see anything wrong with our skins, and we didn't see anything wrong with their skins. It was just a moment, an exciting moment, and we will make friends. That's how we learned decolonizations and the anti-apartheid work outside this. So I'm saying there were spaces at which we understood each other's as human beings, and we were able to make friends. It was through the Boy Scouts, my involvement within the Boy Scouts Association.
Did the Boy Scout leaders, did they teach you where these white people come from in South Africa, that they are in power, how they are in power?
Not necessarily.
No?
Not necessarily. We'll be thrown together into camps, into groups. We would make that connection ourselves.
Like that's like the past of colonialism and all this. Like you made that connection yourself?
Of course, and we were like living in our own world, in our own planet.
Mm.
Apartheid did not exist in those spaces. Mm-hmm. You'll never think about that. It's only when that gathering is over, when you go back into your areas, then again, something troubles you in your mind, looking at the surroundings. It's just an opportunity that comes and goes. But the country is different. So that's the greatest thing about being a kid. You are just innocent. You are just loving. And that tells us the message that you are not born hating. Hate is something that you grab on the way. It's the poison that you breathe in after a certain age. You get poisoned by your surrounding circumstances, and how you are raised is part of the problem.
What did you want to be as a kid?
Well, I have always wanted to be a lawyer, and I had no second option. Even my teachers would argue and say, but you can be a good teacher, because I was always articulating in the class. In fact, I was a smart kid, I must say that. The listeners must get that very clear. I was a very smart kid. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be a lawyer. Being smart means I could get ahead with the subject. Mm-hmm. And the teacher would utilize me to teach other kids, and even challenge me to actually start a chapter that we have not reached, for me to really engage in that chapter and come back and teach other kids. And I was enjoying that, mm-hmm. because I have always loved people. I have always engaged, stood before them. So it really helped me to realize that I was really smart, and therefore use that. It actually helped me as much as I was teaching kids, but I think teachers were intentional about that. It really helped me. But then, of course, finish my matric.
Matric is school?
At school, okay. Yeah, like your grade 12. I don't know what
grade
that
12?
Is. Yeah, grade 12.
13 years now.
Yes, so I was expected to do better, if not good at that time. But because I was growing, I had a lot of personal problems. Being raised by a single mom, having to think about the future, what I want to study. I have applied. Teachers have helped me, though there was no career guidance in school. Mm-hmm. Because I'm growing up, I'm realizing how naked I am, how humiliated I feel, having to be the first kid doing a matric at home. Then I did not do well as I was supposed to. But I made at least 3 distinctions, eh? So, of course, I was, accepted by the university, the former University of Durban-Westville, which is now called University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Did you study law?
I registered as a law student, and remember having been raised by a single mom. At the time, there was nobody who was going to pay for my studies.
It wasn't free?
It wasn't free. And then there was my brother-in-law who was living in Durban. So I had to live with him. And then during the 3rd month, he was then transferred. His work transferred him to Johannesburg. And I had nobody to live with. Nobody to help pay me transport to the university, not to mention tuition fees. So because I was taking a bus to the university, but each time I got to university, there was a community with bad houses, which I learned later that it was an informal settlement. So I will always pass informal settlement, but I will notice those very terrible housing setups. I didn't know what was that because you don't see that in rural areas. It's bad in the city because cities are beautiful, and then suddenly you see the substandard living conditions of people in shanty towns. Not realizing that I would be one of the dwellers there. So when my brother-in-law was then transferred to Johannesburg, I had nowhere to go. I had to walk into that community, and it's called Kennedy Road, informal settlement, in the hills of Clare Estate in Durban. I went to Kennedy Road, very poor community, dirty, with sewer system running all over. No proper housing. It's makeshift kind of housing made of masonite, papers, flammable material. But I had to find a home to rent, first of all. I had to drop out of the university because poverty warned me. No backup system, no backup infrastructure. When I was in this community, then I had to find a job. Now I am a man. I'm no longer a mommy's boy. I'm now on my own.
You were like 19, 20 years old or something?
Yes, I was like...
Early 20s?
Early 20s. And of course, at that point in time, I was able to find a job in a nearby petrol station as a gas attendant. So I got that job, and then I was able to rent out a shack here in this informal settlement. And of course, what I've discovered with this community, as poor as it was, people were friendly, people were welcoming. I felt a sense of humanity, a sense of community, that it became my home. Then I would go to work and come back. But even at that time, I felt I owed this community, and I felt that the community was not doing enough to get out of poverty here. At that time, there was hardly any access to water and sanitation. First of all, there was one tap serving more than 7,000 people. When I came there, water access, one communal tap. It means everyone in the village had to queue for water in this particular tap.
Where did you go to the toilet, for example?
And at that time, I think there were 6 portable toilets.
Okay.
Provided 7,000 people, provided by the local municipality. So, because once then pipe is not enough for such a number of people, these toilets are not enough. We will use bushes. It was normal. Imagine in the city now, using bushes to relieve yourself, having to queue for water. And when you are queuing for water, sometimes you give up. You are tired, you're coming from work, then you have to give up until it's late and less people queuing for water, and then you fetch water. Those who were queuing for toilet, women would often be reported being raped when they go to the bushes, because you cannot queue when the nature calls. You want to go to the toilet. You can't postpone that. That is why bushes were alternatives. And women will be raped. The life has been unfair, very difficult in this informal settlement. But also what happened during that time was that those of listeners who may not know what the shack settlement looked like, what the informal settlement looks like.
I was going to ask, like, so you went there to rent a shack.
Yeah.
Like, you used to live in a better housing conditions, right?
Yeah, it was better.
Okay. What did you feel when you were like forced to rent a shack, and how did it look like? Can you like explain to us
Yeah.
What did you see? What was your shack like?
The shack life was really terrible. Not that I was coming from a fancy, rich family, as I've explained.
Yes.
Deep rural areas was bad, but coming into urban shack settlement, informal settlement, was even worse. So it was a very tiny, small house that had other rooms.
How tiny?
Well, this would be maybe 2 by 2 meters.
2 by 2 meters.
2 by 2 meters. If you have 3 by 2 or 3 by 3, then that is pretty better.
I mean, you can fit a bed inside.
You can that's it. Exactly. That's it. And nothing else. So it's made out of papers that are highly flammable. There would be poles, of course, on the 4 sides, poles, just to create that base. And then...
A paper roof, maybe, or something?
Well, there is what we call corrugated irons.
Mm-hmm.
Some shacks will have like plastic, typical plastic, for the rain not to fall, because obviously you can't put the paper on the top.
Of course.
Yeah. So this is a very small place. The roof is not far. Sometimes you have to just bend to really... you can't just stand because the roof isn't really far away. And it's hot because it's tiny. It's hot. When it's summer, it's hot. Some of these shacks will be made out of the corrugated iron, which makes it extremely hot in summer, but extremely cold in winter. So we joke and say it becomes a fridge in winter, and it becomes really...
sauna or something.
Yeah, that's how these shacks are. But most importantly, these shacks are closely packed together. There are hardly any access road or passageway. Mm-hmm. There may be passageway that you can just walk, but the emergency vehicles cannot have access. So there are no road access. There are no refuse collections. If you have trash, it will pile up until it attracts insects, and there will be a lot of diseases. And of course, informal settlements have the highest, rate of diseases, such as your tuberculosis, HIV and AIDS are high in these areas. But there's no electricity as well. We use candles to light. We use
these paper shacks.
In these shacks. Huh. We use paraffin stoves as source of energy to cook. And because there's no electricity. Now, as a result, if you leave the candle unattended, it can fall. And when it falls, then suddenly there's a fire. Or even these stoves, they can explode. And when they explode, which has happened many times, then if one shack is on fire, suddenly the entire settlement, the entire village, the entire community is on fire. So people have died in shack fires. They continue to die. Just last 2 months in our capital in Pretoria, 5 kids were burnt to ashes beyond recognition. And this is normal. Not only the shack fires that are really terrible, but there are also big rats. I mean, this particular community where it was a home to me, the Kennedy Road, is closer to a dump area, to a landfill site where everyone dumps. In fact, it's the biggest dump site in the city. So shack settlements are located in areas that are very bad. So then there were a lot of rats, big rats, that would come into the informal settlements. And there was an incident where a baby was bitten by a rat to death. A mom has just stepped out within a minute. When the mom returns back, the baby was sleeping. Suddenly, the baby is bleeding from her head. Mm-hmm. And she saw the rat running. And that baby died. So if you Google Mhlengi Khumalo, we had to make a big noise about losing innocent life. So poverty is dangerous. Poverty kills. So we have buried babies killed by rats. We have buried babies and elderly people who have been burnt by shack fires. So poverty is dangerous. Poverty kills.
How long did it take you to get used to shack life? Like, were you like in shock? Like, were you mad at yourself for having to rent a shack, to live in a shack? Like,
for some reason.
How did you get by?
Well, for some reason, because I understood poverty. Of course, this particular one was worse I have ever seen. Mm-hmm. And I felt that the community was not doing enough to resist poverty, to reject poverty, to try and really do something about it. And the beating of Mhlengi Khumalo by rats, the death of several community members, particularly Mama Kuzwayo, who was really unable to run away from the shack fire because she was somehow disabled and she was burnt to death in this shack fire. I took a decision. No human being on their right conscious will do nothing about that situation.
That's how you got into political activism? That's how you became a political person?
Exactly. It was at that moment that innocent child died in that way. It was at that point where an elderly disabled mama, a mother, was burnt to death. And I had her head bursting in shack fire. I was pretty new in this community. Mm-hmm. You know, people knew that there was somebody inside. And the flames were just high that you cannot do anything. Remember, there are now only 5 water standpipes far away from where the shack fire. So you'll use 5, 10 liters, 20 liter fetching water to try and extinguish the fire. And the fire has just gone big. You are making no dent. People had to watch people burning into death helplessly. Of course, you will phone for the firefighters from the city center. It will take half an hour to an hour to arrive. And by that time, the flames cannot be put down. So that's what we were confronted with. It was at that moment that I decided that my conscience had to do something about that situation. And what I did was to start organizing people. And when I started organizing people, not that they weren't organized, but at that time, there was no democracy in this community. I remember there was one man who was the only person who had a car in the entire settlement. Mm-hmm. He was the only man who actually had a spaza shop, a restaurant, fast food. He was in charge, not elected. And I thought he was a traditional leader. We call that Izinduna and at home. But he was not. Nobody elected him. He was just this powerful man who had money, the only person that has had a car in the settlement, only person that had a shop. whenever there are meetings, he will grab any beautiful woman to become his secretary. And then that woman will kind of escort him to the so-called meeting to represent us. And when they come back from the meeting, of course, there's no accountability, no minutes shared, no feedback. Only whenever he feels like he can use the community is only when he calls the meeting. But he was not elected. So I started organizing at that point where there was no democracy in Czech settlement. I started democratizing, of course, along with others. But at that point, men were fearing this particular man. They didn't want to challenge him. It was only women that could confront this man.
Why were the men afraid?
Well, for some reason, because I did use the term traditional leader. So men kind of think that he's a Superman. He cannot be challenged, so he's right. He's been given this power naturally, and therefore, who are we to challenge this man? But he was feared for some reason. People feared him. Not that he had said anything or intimidated anyone, but he was really a man that was not friendly to anyone. He was guiding his power, making sure that he kept this power. But guess what? Women were the only one who were able to speak against him, challenge him, hold him accountable. In the year 2000, then, and the youth, of course, women were organizing, but the young people also were able to quickly organize, but around sports, arts and culture. That's how we were able to bring young people, setting up festivals and so on. So the combination of young people and women who were now realizing that the power of this man has actually stopped the possible development in this area. Because I was a young person at the time. This was like my father and who I am to challenge him. But then I think some people realized that as young I may have been at that point, there was a bit of wisdom. Not to say I was clever. There was a bit of wisdom, and people felt that I could become a chairperson. And in the year 2000, that's when we had our first democratic election, and I was elected as the chairperson of the Kennedy Road Development Committee at that time. It was known as the KRDC, Kennedy Road Development Committee, along with others. And at that point, then we had a legitimate right to start speaking on behalf of the people with the city.
But first, I mean, there was the election. You became the chairperson. How did you convince the powerful man to step away, to go away? Like,
yeah,
that's the important step.
Yes, but that was not my job. It was a job of those who put me there. It was these powerful women that actually...
What did they do? Did they go to the...
They protested to him. Actually, they organized the meeting and the hall. Fortunately, that committee had a hall that was built by the old apartheid government for some reason. It was the only Czech settlement that had a beautiful hall. So on that day, the hall was fully packed. Young people had organized. Women of integrity had organized. He was summoned. It was women that went and called him.
Like, come here, we need to talk.
We need to talk. The community wants to hear. So it was strange for him. He did not refuse, but...
Were you there? Were you there?
I was there, of course, I was there. So, and then when he came in, people were already protesting and speaking in their numbers, led by women, to say, we had enough of you.
What did he say?
Well, you can't answer 500 people. You just cannot. He couldn't really say anything. But you could see he was angry, and you could see he was kind of, identifying some people who were in the forefront of this. And we knew that we were playing with fire.
Did he make threats?
Of course. Only his facial expression was threatening.
Mm-hmm.
He was angry that who the hell are you that you can now confront me? All these years I was your God, I was in charge, I was your chief. Suddenly you have got to kind of speak to me like this. But, there were high energies, from women, young people, chanting slogans, sending messages to say, we have had enough of you, and today we are electing our own committee. So that was not my battle. It was the battle of the people. I was afraid. I was young people, and I was new, like in the settlement.
But you watched in awe, like, oh my God, what is happening?
Yes, and I knew that my life was in danger from the onset. But for some reason, the man understood that I was like being used. So he did not target me because he felt I was a kid to confront him. Therefore, there were people behind me who he should be dealing with. But then, it was difficult for him to kind of challenge them.
Just to understand, like, this powerful man, did he make money with your guys' situation? Why? Like, what was the power for? Like, did he get like government money and didn't provide housing? Like, what was the purpose of his power? Like, why did he want to keep it?
Well, the purpose of the power was to accumulate
wealth.
Uh-huh. As I said earlier on, he was the only man who had a shop in this entire village.
Yes.
He was the only man who had a car in this village. He was the only man who attends meetings, whether called by the city council to lie to him, or whether there was development, whether there was employment from the rich neighborhood. He was not just a representative, but also a spokesperson. So by virtue of his position in the community, not to mention the business element, made him powerful.
Okay.
So if there was ever any opportunity that coming into the area, it was through him. He decided what's good for the community and what's good for him. So
let's call it coup d'etat, was successful?
It was, very constructive, democratic.
A democratic
coup d'etat was successful.
It was led by women.
It was led by women.
But you said they made you the chairperson as a man. Why didn't a woman become a chairperson if they led the fight?
Oh yes, no, absolutely. They led the fight, and I don't think I was elected because I was a man. I don't think that had anything to do with gender and muscular. But I think because I was new in the settlement and I was a smart kid, irrespective of my gender. There were elderly women who, for instance, they would call me my son. We like you. We want you there. We are going to protect you. They knew exactly I was a kid. I needed some protection because you can have a limited wisdom, but of course you can be in a dangerous area until there's an elderly people that holds your hands. So they, as a son, they held my hands navigate.
And by chairperson, you mean you were like the leader of this 7,000 people check?
Yes.
What did you change? What was the first? What were the first things you changed compared to the king before, the powerful man before?
Well, I remember
Did you take the car?
No, of course. So first of all, we started engaging with the municipality.
The town.
It's a metro. It's a big metropolitan council.
Okay.
So I led the delegation, the leadership of Kennedy Road into negotiating with the city council.
What did you want? We
wanted housing at the time. All we wanted was housing. You can see shacks have killed people, homelessness have killed people. So we've made this appointment, and I led this delegation. Amongst me, there were older men, there were older women. Guess what? When we got into the city hall where the meeting was going to be held, because it was raining in the informal settlement, and our shoes were full of mud. And then when we got in, a man who was wearing boots, those big shoes, meant to be able to deal with the mud. He had more mud on his shoes, on his boot, and he was refused entry into the carpets of the city hall. Guess what? He was chased back. And our fight started right at the door. And we had to force the city to acknowledge, of course, our living conditions. And we had to describe that as the reason why we are meeting the city. And it took a bit of a while for, the city people to allow him. You see, poverty can even bar you from entering into a space where you can describe yourself and tell your story. Mm-hmm. That's how poverty can be. So we had to fight for him to enter the space because otherwise he was not allowed.
Were you successful in your fight with the city council? Like, what did you want and what did you get?
Yeah, well, the first meeting we did not win anything. Of course, there were several meetings, but what was important about us meeting, it was a big thing from the community because never before they had stepped their feet into a city hall, into an administration building. Mm-hmm. Never, ever before.
The powerful man before was always doing that for you.
We didn't know whether he had access, entrance there, but because there was no report. But each time we met the city council, we will call a mass meeting, community meeting, where we'll report back. And the truth was very important at that time. We did not wanted to be seen as smart people who are really making things possible. So we will report exactly what we've been told at the city council. But there was a meeting where we were excited when we came from that meeting. And what that meeting did was to promise decent housing for the people of Kennedy Road, was to promise a piece of land near this community. And they said, we are going to build you houses in this particular piece of land. And that was an exciting moment. And we called the mass meeting again and reported. Everyone was excited. We were like heroes because we've never seen this kind of promise.
Everything is great.
Yeah, the community is doing well. It's interacting with the community, and suddenly people have developed interest of coming into meetings because they know real reports.
Good news.
Good news. But guess what?
Did the promise come true?
Few days after that promise, and of course we saw what we call a ganda, a bulldozer, caterpillar clearing the land, and we're even more happier. And that land is nearby a bus stop where people come in, like transport station, and this piece of land. So everyone coming, they can see that this big, machine working to clear the land, and people were clearing their hands. But then we were conscious. We were just promised a piece of land, but within a few days, they're already working on that land. How realistic is this? When was the planning done? And we kind of realized that this was too truth to be real.
Too good to be true.
Yeah, too good to be true. And then we went to ask the man who was driving the machine, why are you clearing this piece of land? And the man told us that this piece of land was sold to a local businessman to build a brickyard. In other words, it was going to be a business space where bricks were going to be made and sold. When we had that, what a disappointment. We called the community again. This constant reporting back is a very clear democratic culture that every leader ought to adhere to. Now things are changing. We called this meeting and we told people that, by the way,
the city council lied to you.
The city council lied to us. What do we do? Being smart does not mean that you need to have answers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But being smart can also mean that you are stupid to raise your levels of stupidity and ignorance. That what we will do, we'll call the community and say, but what do we do now? Well, the community said, well, let us all go and make sure what you are telling us is right. The masses now walked into that piece of land that was being cleared for so-called housing. And the man repeated the same words. And people started protesting on that time, at that moment, at that point. And when they protested, of course, police were called in and people were arrested. Mostly young people who were at school at the time were arrested. Now, us as leaders weren't arrested for some reasons. Not that it was deliberately, but there were masses on the road. When we protested, we actually blockaded the M19, which is really a busy road leading to the city center.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought this traffic into a standstill, demanding that those who made those promises must come and account to the community. And of course, this is called civil disobedience. We are engaging in an out-of-order politics. People were arrested. And then we had a huge pressure from parents saying, but why weren't you arrested? Why our kids?
Mm-hmm.
So kids were refused bail and they were charged with what they call in law in South Africa public, it's called, they were charged for public order. So this is like public disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
They were charged with violence and they were refused bail. Remember, this is before the movement was born. I'm just talking about this one particular community.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have money for bail. We did not have lawyers. They were held in a very notorious prison called Westville. So what are we going to do? Several meetings were held. But I remember they were arrested like today. The following day, we marched into the nearby police station where they were held. There was another march demanding that they were to be released.
Mm-hmm.
Or we were saying to the police, it's either you release them or you arrest us all. Because what do you mean by public violence? Which public are we really, violating? We are the public. Now we are saying, release them.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it was that simple.
Did it work?
At that point, we only learned that we are not even recognized as public, as community. We're seen as just nonsense in the city. We realized on the march, because that march was dispersed with bullets, then grenades, and all kinds of violence that the police used to disperse us. At that point, on that day, we realized that we were not human enough.
Mm.
By public, they meant middle class and the rich people around us, not us. We were just piece of trash making noise in the city. That's how we were being dealt with. And of course, we had to fundraise.
But they shot at you and used grenades and all that?
A lot of people were shot with rubber bullets. Of course, There was no fatality. But that's how violence, the culture of violence. We are governed with violence in South Africa. And of course, we had to fundraise. We had to put money together as a community because there was no donor funding at that time. We knew nothing about that. And we felt that we were on our own. So we were able to raise money. And of course, there were friends, there were journalists who came because this was suddenly a big protest. Journalists that came at that time, then they were able to, call us on the side and offer us help, linked us with lawyers who would do pro bono work. Then we started networking and, we got friends who were really prepared to help us in this trouble. And after several weeks, if not months, then we had this lawyer and the comrades were released on bail. And at the time, probably 50% of the people who were arrested, I think there were like 6 people who were arrested, and I think half of them were kids schooling. And at that time, they were writing exams. So they were under pressure. Parents were very angry about that situation, especially that leaders were not arrested. It was just ordinary activists that were arrested. So we had to deal with the pressure from within ourselves, and we were able to manage because I think we were very genuine and honest about what happened.
So what happened to the land that was promised to you, like with the bulldozer for this?
Yeah, of course, the businessman was protected by the police. He had leased the land. He tried to make friendship with us, tried to explain that he had nothing to do with politics. He didn't know that the same land was promised to us. And we created some kind of relationship because we had to understand how did he come about taking the land meant to us. And he says, well, this is totally misinformation. Actually, these people were lying. So this businessman, he had a battle with the community because he started fencing that land. And then the first thing the community did was to take out those poles. And it became some sort of a joke. It's when he started negotiating that the police can not guard him 24 hours. During the day, he's okay. At night, people will come and take off the fence. And we played that game. He realized that he needed to negotiate. And eventually we became friends. We knew who was fooling who. And then we had to deal with the politicians. So, of course, he was leasing the land to a certain period, and he's no longer there.
But what happened with the negotiations? Was it like a happy ending with the businessman and the city council? For your Kennedy Road check?
Well, the businessman offered to help us in our fight. He realized that our fight was fair, just. He realized that we were played, we were lied to, and he offered some assistance, meaning that he was not part of the game. So he became very sorry. Then he became generous to us, and we actually worked with him. Now offering even transport when we protest, when we engage the authorities. So he became like man supporting behind the scene. So yeah.
But what you guys wanted was housing.
Yes.
Did you get this? Or does the checks of Kennedy Road, do they still exist? Or?
Well, after 10 years of that.
10 years?
Yeah. After 10 years of that, and the movement has now been formed, a movement of shack dwellers. Now that protest, joined by other informal settlements, by other communities who would participate in our march, who then said, we can't just accompany you, we can't just stand in solidarity with you, but we are you. The services, the infrastructure that you don't have, we don't have as well. We don't have housing, we don't have land. So these are like neighboring communities up until on the 4th of October 2005. These communities came together and form the shack dwellers movement that is existing today. So then 10 years later, constant negotiation, back and forth, protest. Now there are about 300 houses now that have been built on that piece of land. It's only now.
In 2023.
In 2023. Only like...
You moved there in 2000, right? Like around 2000?
I left Kennedy Road in 2009.
Okay. You used to live in a shack for 9 years? 9 years? Right?
Well,
you said
it
you
was
were
about
like
17 years. About 17 years I lived there. 17 years.
In a small shack?
In Kennedy Road. Well, when I first occupied, then I was living in the small, renting, up until I was given my own space as a leader now. The committee felt that I needed a space of my own as a leader of a community.
Like a bigger shack or like...
a bigger space. Mm-hmm. Then I had a bigger shack. Yeah, mine was very big. So because I'm now the leader, the committee felt that I deserve to have my own space and with
but still no running water, no electricity?
Well, what got increased, what we won, obviously, was more water standpipes, was more toilets, was even the cleaning of an old toilet that were closed before drained. You know, these Petro tin toilets, it's called VIP, ventilated Petro tin toilets. It gets full. So, and then it was cleaned. So we started winning victories step by steps, increased toilet, increased water standpipes, dealing with the rats. The health department will come and spray, fumigate, and put poison for rats not to be as many as they would have been. But then, of course, in 2009, there was a conspiracy, an attempt to my life. And I'm explaining the reason why I left Kennedy Road.
Someone wanted to kill you?
Yes, the ruling African National Congress.
ANC?
Yes. They ganged, they organized this plot, they sent hitmen, hired people. It's normal now in South Africa. Yeah, it's normal to hire a person, pay him to assassinate someone. So this failed conspiracy, they came to my house looking for me. And at that time, Abahlali Youth League had a camp at the community hall. You know, we have a whole night camp where we will come together from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. to do our political work. So during that day, and I remember this very vividly, on the 26th and the 27th of September 2009, my house was attacked. They went to the community hall because I'm always with people. They thought I was there. They realized I was not there. They came into my house, and of course, somebody gave a tip to my partner and the kids that I am under attack, and my partner ran into a neighbor. And when they could not find me in my house, they started destroying all my belongings. They started stealing whatever was possible for them to steal. Then they destroyed my house, like with axe, with hammers, everything that you can think of. They destroyed my house. In the community hall, they attacked the community hall where the Youth League of Abahlali had the camp, where they could not find me. And they went to all the homes of the leaders. They attacked the leaders, they destroyed them. It was like war. The following day, in a broad daylight, when police were called in, there were all kinds of security forces in Kennedy Road during that day. There were public order police, there were intelligence, there were South African police services, there was Metro Police. They were all in Kennedy Road. But guess what? My house was satellite in a broad daylight. The spaza shops and the homes of other leaders of Abahlali were destroyed. The movement offices in Kennedy Road, including the library, were ransacked in the presence of the police. Now, 2 people were killed at that night. Hundreds of people were injured. Tens of people were hospitalized. It was like war. That's what happened when they could not find me. Lives were lost. People were displaced. People were injured.
Why did they want to kill you?
Well, the ANC had actually realized, in fact, they claimed to be owning the people. So they felt that I was taking over their power. They felt that people respected me and the leaders. They felt that people were listening too much of me. They felt that I was undermining them.
So they kill you?
They wanted to kill me. And we later realized that actually that plot was organized and planned at a very high political level. It was not just the local people. The following day, after people were killed, the government of KwaZulu-Natal, the state, cabinet ministers, members of the executive council had a press conference in Kennedy Road. They bussed people who are not even living in the area. They bussed people, ANC members from outside the area.
Pretending to live there?
Yes, and to launch a propaganda that Sbu is responsible for the killing of people. I was accused of running my own authority. And we have footage and the whole video of this press briefing. They launched this attack, propaganda that I killed people. I remember it was all over the newspaper. My face was all over. And the headline saying, suspected leader who killed the people. Those were the headlines in some of the popular newspapers. And I was like in hiding at the time. Because at that conference, they even invited former soldiers of the Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing of the ANC, was part of that conference. And they were instructed to hunt me. I remember receiving a call from the MEC for transport committee liaison officer, who's like the MEC for police in the province, asking me to come into that press conference. And I said I was not safe. And he offered me security services to provide security for me to go there. And I said to him, well, actually, I am afraid of you. How can you then protect me when you are actually the one that I'm fearing? Because I knew they were behind the whole thing. And I refused to attend that press briefing. And then my name and the name of the organization, Abahlali, and its leaders were then attacked. And they went to parliament, to the legislature, to celebrate the displacement of people, to celebrate the killing of people that were killed, to celebrate, and they actually said Kennedy Road was liberated because we were driven off our homes. Guess what? The very same people whose homes were burnt down, the very same people who were actually victims in this attack, were the ones who were arrested and charged with serious murders.
How long did you have to hide? Like when was it safe for you? Like did they try to keep killing you?
There were a number of attempts on my life, even beyond that. I remember having to be offered protection by the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department. I had to fly to the U.S. for protection under the International Visitors Leadership Program. There's a program where they can quickly organize visas to protect human rights defenders. And I spent a little bit of time in the U.S. And of course, when I came back suddenly, and of course I was underground. And there are seasons of these threats. And I emerged. And it comes and go. And but up until today, one is under strict security protocols. We have to do our work of organizing, of community work on a daily basis under strict, close protection protocols. There has been a number of attempts to my life. One day, the tampered with my vehicle, and I escaped a terrible accident on the national road.
Like they cut the brakes or something? Or?
The gearbox underneath, they actually tampered. I didn't know until we took the vehicle to the specialist to check what went wrong, and the report was very clear. And from the experts we had invited from Kenya to provide us with security trainings and so on. In fact, when we were fetching those folks from Kenya who were invited to provide security training for leaders, we went to fetch them in the airport. And we were followed with them, actually, when we dropped them at the hotel. And the guy was here, and I did not realize. So now we have these experts, and this guy opened the window and says, well, there's something wrong with your vehicle. You would be in a very, if you drive this car, let me help you in. I want to jack the car. The guy was like laying on the floor, wanting to help us. And we were saying, but how does he know that there's something underneath? And like he was insisting that he has to help us. Without noticing, it was only this expert who actually told us later when we were at home what was happening, that actually we were being followed. That guy did not, because we were like stopping the car and suddenly he's here. But we said, we're just arriving. How do you know there's something? And they said, well, the guy was following us, from the airport on our arrival, but for some reason, there were people with us. So, yeah, there has been a number of attempts. But up until today, the organization, Shareholders Movement, has lost 25 activists to murder, to assassination. Just last year alone, in one community, in Ekenana, in Durban, we've lost 3 activists. In a nearby community, we lost 1 activist. So like 4 activists within the space of 6 months. And we know the people that are killing us. The ANC and its government have refused to provide protection to us, which tells you exactly that they are part of the killing. Right. They have done nothing. We have buried people. 25 lives have been lost since 2009. Just last year alone, within the space of 6 months, 4 activists have been shot.
I mean, I need to ask, because like you're saying that the ANC, the ruling party in your country, wanted to kill you at least a few times. Is there any proof to this? Like, is this public knowledge? Or could people say like, Cebu, what is he saying? Like, he's making it up. Why would the government of South Africa want to kill him? He's crazy.
Well, we are told right on our faces. I get told by the politicians that I'm actually disturbing them from eating. They are there to eat when they go to work for government in the city council or in the legislature in government. They are there to eat for us, and they eat on our behalf. And we are disturbing them from eating. So they will tell us, it is my time to eat. So there's absolutely nothing about the country, about the people. People are just there to enrich themselves. And why am I targeted? Why is leaders and the movement is targeted? Abahlali has organized outside the African National Congress, outside the ANC, because they claim as the only organization that represent the poor and the working class. Mm-hmm. Now the poor and the working class are rejecting that.
You challenge the power of the ANC.
Yes. Secondly, they are targeting us because we organize outside the state control. So we must get instruction, we must get permission. Mm. We were once told that we must stay away from media. We were banned actually for speaking with journalists. But organizing the unorganized poor has really become a thorn on the ANC. We've said this over and over. The ANC will never come out and defend that. So the answer to your question, it is public knowledge. It is widely known that the ANC is killing Abahlali, and the ANC has never denied that. And why? Because some ANC leaders have been found guilty by the court of law. 2 ANC councillors in the city of Durban were prosecuted and were found guilty, and they are serving life imprisonment. So it is public knowledge. I am aware.
Guilty of murder? Or?
Guilty of murder.
Okay.
So I'm aware that I may be making serious allegations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very conscious what this could mean. But the truth is that there have been convictions. And continue. Some of their members are continuing facing. Just 3 months ago, one of the ANC youth leader was also sentenced to 15 years for murder. So it's normal. ANC accept that it has gangster within it. They know it's public knowledge that they have become a better oppressor. The once oppressed have now become better oppressors. This is what we are confronted with in a new South Africa.
Tell us, your organization, you named it a few times, and I think you are wearing a uniform of Abahlali. Can you explain what is the name actually stand for Abahlali, baseMjondolo?
Yeah, well, it's called...
What does it mean?
Yeah, it's called Abahlali baseMjondolo. Basically, Abahlali means residents.
Residents, yeah.
Of the shacks, baseMjondolo. So these are shack dwellers. These are residents of the shacks.
Is it Afrikaans?
It's a local language. It's a Zulu word. Zulu. So when this name was brought about, it didn't come from one clever individual. It was out of a democratic process. There was a conversation, and then somebody said, "Hang on, but we are all living in the informal settlements. We were struggling with identity, because it's not one community, it's many communities." But everyone was saying, but we're all coming from the shacks. That's how the name itself became known as the residents of the shacks. These are people who are living in the informal settlements. That's how this name came about on the 4th of October 2005. So we are now 18 years old as a movement. Mm-hmm. So we are not fly-by-nights. We did not just emerge yesterday. Mm-hmm. We have long way that we have gone. We have scars on our back. We have buried comrades. We have suffered in the hands of a black-led democratic government. We are ashamed. They have brought shame in our country. We love our country and its people. They think they own us. They think they own the country. And that country belongs to its people, not to political gangsters.
What you're wearing, for the people who are watching right now, is it a uniform?
Well,
tell us about it.
This is a proudly uniform of Abahlali. Mm-hmm. It's just a gear. Okay. It's mostly red. Mm-hmm. We are known as the Red Organization, as a red force, as a red river. That's what we are known for. Well, first of all, the color red is a symbol of the working class, a symbol of struggle, a symbol of blood and pain. The working class and the poor are working very hard throughout the world. So red has become to symbolize, it has become an international symbol of the working class struggling.
Does it have anything to do with socialism or communism?
Of course, we are socialists. We are struggling for a socialist state where at least the working class owns the means of production. We cannot afford to enrich few people at the expense of the majority. So we are building socialism. Just before I came here, I was at the conference titled Dilemmas of Humanity. And the aim of that conference in the city of Johannesburg, which is actually ending today, it started on Saturday, acknowledges the crisis that humanity faces and brought together left organizations, activists who are committed to dismantle capitalism because it has become a cancer. It puts profit before human needs. And we want a society where every man and woman is respected, is treated with respect and dignity, where everyone has rights. Those rights that are enshrined in our Constitution and in international laws right now are enjoyed by individuals, particularly those who owns the means of production.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot afford working class to work, get exploited, and remain poor. These cities were built by the working class. But how much do they own? The land and the wealth must be shared amongst those who work the land. That's what we believe in.
The audience who's watching can ask you questions as well. Just a reminder: give it to Hans in the chat, and he's gonna come after me and ask you about them. You kind of sound like, I think, or better, like you have a lot in common with my previous guest, Bernie Sanders. Like he's a socialist as well. He hopes to overcome capitalism as well.
Yes, capitalism has become a cancer. If not removed, it's going to poison us as a society. The whole world is in crisis through environmental injustices to human dignity. Our planet is under attack. Capitalism has reached its end. It cannot go any longer. That is why we're facing destruction. We're facing nature turning against us because we have not respected nature, because we just want to produce, and we're in crisis. It is for that reason why many progressive groups from around the world are now coming together to say we can no longer afford to stand aside and watch our planet being destroyed.
Have you guys found an answer how to overcome capitalism? I mean, it's easy to
talk about,
to analyze the problem.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of practical steps that have been taken that we continue to take. I mean, the first one, obviously, is to build the power of the impoverished from below, build the power of the people. It's important that the majority of the people in our planet understand and are able to analyze the challenges that are faced. I mean, the problem that are faced by South Africans are also faced throughout the world, even amongst the wealthy nations. There is poverty. Yeah. Because capitalism cannot stop accumulating profit at the expense. How is it possible that very few people are so rich? The gaps between the haves and the don't haves, that gap cannot continue to widen. Somebody is not doing the right thing. It's a moral question, it's an ethical question that we should all try and find ways. So it cannot be right, like how we started the conversation. It cannot be correct that a black child cannot have a bike. I mean, that is privilege, but a food to eat. It cannot be correct that you cannot have land in your own country. We can only have peace in this world when there is justice. As long as the injustices, corruption, exploitation, inequalities, colonialism, and apartheid continue in the manner in which it does, there cannot be peace. As long as we are not doing justice to nature, to climate, we are in trouble. we are inviting catastrophe. This is what we are confronted with. So we need to have this conversation. Not to say I have any answer, but at least a journey to a better world is looming.
I mean, what's true for hundreds or 150 years is that the people in charge or in power, those who want to, let's say, keep the capitalist system, keep the status quo, there's always the one thing that they always do is put the lower classes against each other. Yeah. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are tricks and tactics of the capitalist class. That is why it is our work, our day-to-day responsibility, and it's a responsibility of each member, not just leaders, to contribute to unity and peace building. It is for that reason why solidarity is important, because when we are divided, when we are isolated from the rest, we become weaker. That is why unity, solidarity between and within struggling communities from around the world is very important.
I kind of had to smile when you said you want the means of production in the hands of the workers. Did you read Karl Marx?
Of course, of course. As an activist struggling for socialism, well, Karl Marx would be the first man to engage in these questions. What's the point for you to work, but you don't own what is produced by your sweat, by your power? Somebody else from somewhere else takes it, and it gets sold to you. You sell your labor, and you work hard, but you remain poor. That's what often happens in many African countries. People work hard. They work as early as 4 o'clock in the morning, but they're still remaining poor. What does that mean? Why are we working when there's no justice in terms of revenue, return for the work you do?
Have you always been an anti-capitalist, a socialist? Or was there a time when you were...
Well, for me, it's really not much about those terms. It's a question of justice. I said I grew up as a Boy Scout, which is non-political.
Okay.
It was the question of justice, one's loves for humanity, one's loves for one's country, one's loves for one world, but a commitment for a better society. All we want is to humanize the world, no matter how you call these terms, because I know some of these terms, some people are really not feeling comfortable. It's not about the terms. It's about the reality. We want a better world for everyone. We want a more human world, a world that is welcoming, a world that is responsible, a world that is caring for every creature, for every human being. Some people are seen as less human. We have to question that, of course.
But some people will be like, he's a dreamer. Sabu's a dreamer. Like, this is not going to ever work out. Accept the status quo.
Of course, I would understand those people, but at least...
Where does your hope come from?
Well, it comes from the reality that we see on the ground.
I mean, you've been working with the organization for 18 years.
Yes.
You obviously you are hated by your government. You have not made a lot of strides for overcoming the shack dwellers and all this shack dwelling.
Yeah.
Where does your hope come from with so little success?
Well, the hope comes because we are human beings, and we have to claim that. As soon as you give up in life without a fight, then it tells a lot of story about you. Dreaming is not a bad thing. Trying efforts, no matter how many times one fails, but at least efforts, try, willingness for a good for others. It's easy to kind of raise such questions from the point of privileges, but if you have seen poverty, you have tested, you have lived poverty, you have no break. You are called to fight for the entire life. Even if we do not win, but that we have peace, that we have not ignored crisis, human crisis and catastrophe. We have done something. We have a responsibility to report to the next generation, to say, what have we done during our times to make this world a better place for everyone? The founder of the Boy Scouts Association, Lord Baden-Powell, once said, leave this earth a better world than you have found it. That's all we do. What is wrong with us trying for the less privileged? Because of the economic system we are all following. Why can't we, of course, we may not, it's a dream to make everyone happy, but can't we make life livable? Can't we set a minimum wage for people to be able to pay for their kids for a better education? Can't we have access to better health care facilities? Can't we be treated as human beings that matter? Is it too much to ask to be more human?
Let's talk about your movement. I mean, is it? I guess it's radically democratic. You've been president for 18 years now?
Yes, although in between there was a time that I was, during our time of office, somebody became a president in between.
How many times?
I can say out of 18 years, I would say maybe 17 times, yeah.
So people always re-elect you?
Yes, even when I refuse, because the seat that I am in now is no longer a joke, is no longer a child's play. It's actually playing with fire. Getting into my shoes is very difficult. If I can tell you, there are moments as a leader, what I have experienced, where I actually was told that I have 2 weeks to live. This came from the intelligence warning me that my life was in danger. This is the reliable source that I had 2 weeks surviving. And imagine having been told that you can be killed at any time. I had sleepless nights. I could not share this with my family as a form of protecting them. I could not even share this kind of information with my comrades, my other leaders. I had accepted that death was inevitable. Mm-hmm. Imagine having to live like that, and you know that you are being hunted and anything could happen at any time. Have you had a moment when you had to think about the things you have not achieved in lives because you knew that your life was coming to an end? So this is the kind of feeling when you are a leader. So for a very long time, this position was not contested, because when you accept it, you are inviting death. Should our democracy be like that? Should activists be hunted? Should we not be free to organize? What is wrong with us having to define our own destiny? What is wrong with us organizing the unorganized, having a different view? What is wrong with that? Is that not a democratic praxis? That we should and accept different views, be challenged, be held accountable? What is wrong with that? Why is it so strange when people ask questions? We have developed what we call W questions to the state. When are you planning to build houses for the people? What assurance are you now going to give it to us after lying and lying? How are you going to do this? Up until today, 18 years later, there is absolutely no plan how informal settlement will be upgraded. There's no plan or willing as to how houses are going to be built for people. But there's a clear plan how to eradicate, destroy shacks. There's a clear plan how to evict people, and it's well-resourced. But there's no plan how to improve people's life. There's no clear plan how we can participate in building our own future.
Maybe you and your movement are such a danger to your government and to your system because you fundamentally challenge its system. Like you go to the root of the problem. And if you're successful, this could endanger the whole system.
What is interesting about that is that the same people who are in government today, before they got to government, they were thinking like us. They were with us. They were part of us. Not so long ago. They were given refugee in neighboring countries when the apartheid state hunted them. Mm-hmm. They were given protection by Amnesty International and other international human rights organizations. They had offices in London, Tanzania, as victims of apartheid. But today they are in power. They are sending us into all these places to hide for them. The system is not fair. It is corrupt. But there's no system. It's the same people. They have power, they have ability to say the very same things they were saying when they were out of power, what they were saying against the apartheid government. This is what we are saying. We are saying the same story, the same song they were singing not so long ago. They were appalled by how the apartheid government treated us. So oppression is oppression everywhere. Whether you are oppressed by the white or the black, oppression is oppression, and it remains oppression.
How many members do you guys have?
Well, Abahlali membership has about 120,000 members. And we are told that we are one of the biggest social movements to have emerged in post-apartheid South Africa. Mm-hmm. And we are growing. Not that we are smart. What makes us grow is poverty. People are forced into activism. They are forced into having to engage with poverty, inequality, oppression, violence, dispossessions of land. The more poverty and violence of the state is unleashed, then they join our movement. We don't go out and mobilize and recruit people, come and join. No, it's not nice to be an activist. It is dangerous. We have not chosen it. But we had to do something for our children and for the future generation.
Tell us what you guys want. What are these dangerous demands that you guys have that challenge the system? Like, give me what you want, like your concept of housing and what you demand of your government and your...
Very simple. We want land.
Whose land?
It is our land. We want it from the government who has power to take back our land, to expropriate our land. Even our constitution allows that to happen. Although there's contrast with the property rights, but the government has all the power, at least to take public land for public use. Mm-hmm. But they have chosen not to do so. Very interesting, a few months ago, we were in court. The judge was asking the city council, why don't you expropriate land for these people? You know, poor folks were facing eviction from a landlord, and the court is asking the city government, but why don't you expropriate this land for people? They refused. Not that it is not doable, it is not possible, it's a political will. So there's no will to restore the dignity of the African people. Not just land. We want decent housing. Of course, land first to build the decent housing that we want. To farm and produce food that cannot be possible without land. To build all the other infrastructure that is necessary for any human beings.
Running water, electricity. Internet.
Yes, hospital, clinics. We just want to be people. Is it too much to ask for that? Can you call that conspiracy? Hope?
I just wanted to know what dangerous demands there are, because you seem to be so dangerous. Because people, I know I'm joking, but you're under threat.
Absolutely. Just for demanding a place called home.
The first thing you said, you want land. Are you only talking about public land, or because at the beginning you said that most of the land are in hands of the white minority.
Yeah.
You also want land of the white minority.
We want justice. Land must be shared. We are not saying somebody must remain landless. Land must be shared equally amongst those who live and work the land. What's wrong with that? How is it possible? How is it acceptable that 87% of land is owned by 7% of the population? Only 13% of the land is in the hands of the majority. How is it possible on earth? Are we becoming a joke? What was this fight for freedom for? Freedom without land? Freedom without decent housing? Freedom without access to better education, better health facilities? What was this freedom without the right to organize as workers, employed or unemployed?
Maybe Nelson Mandela forgot about the economic freedom.
We must face that reality. It was a negotiated settlement. Mm-hmm. And we end up getting just the right to vote, the political freedom, just to make noise, organize, but still get nothing.
The stuff you demand, is that a part of your constitution? I think you already mentioned it. Is this legal? Is this constitutionally legal what you want, or does the constitution have to be changed for you guys getting land?
Well, we are told that we have a progressive constitution in the world. Now, the constitution does give us the right to housing. And it protects us from arbitrary evictions. However, that is Section 26 of the Constitution. It talks about access, the right to access to housing, not the right to housing. It is the right of access to housing. Mm-hmm. But then Section 25 then limits that rights. So it means you can actually have the right to housing, but you cannot have the right to land. Hang on now. Where am I going to build this house without land? So this right to housing is becoming a joke without the right to land. That's what we are faced with. So the Constitution needs to be changed. A lot of it favors the minority to continue exploit the majority of this country.
How do you change the Constitution?
And sometimes I wonder if we own our own country. I wonder if really our own country is in the hands of us. Because we agree that the fundamental challenge that remains with the struggle of the people of South Africa is the question of land. Our own minerals, resources, our golds, our diamonds that gets exported. And we still have to argue that what belongs to the land have to work to develop the land and the people of the land. This is not to say there must not be international cooperations and all of that, but wouldn't you really prioritize your family, your country? You want to be a beggar even when you are sitting with wealth? Is that the conversation we must have? That we must remain beggars in our own country? Because suddenly somebody doesn't want to offend somebody in another country.
This once again reminds me of Bernie Sanders. Like, he wrote a book. That's why I was here. And there was one big sentence that said the oligarchs of the US, the American oligarchs, they own the United States. It kind of sounds like the very rich. They own the means of production in the United States. They have the power.
In fact, everywhere.
Kind of sounds like South Africa.
Everywhere in the world. That's called imperialism. No face, but they run the show. Those who work hard, work for them, but they still have nothing. They are still poor.
You want land? You want decent housing? What does decent housing mean exactly?
Well, decent,
like a house, like an apartment
Well, in an African culture, we are not a flat kind of population.
Mm-hmm.
A house must be big enough to provide security and comfort, but it must have a garden. Where kids can play, where food can be grown, so that even when there is high rate of unemployment, we still have a vegetable garden here. Because there's enough land. Land is just big for everyone. Of course, in the cities, you may not have that privilege. But the house, at least, must be equal to the size of the family. You know, some families have bigger family members, yet they are squeezed into a very small house. And of course, government does something good. Of course, not everything is bad. I'm not really here to say everything is bad. Government does build houses for the poor. Although it has its own challenges that those houses are sold or given along party lines. Only the ruling party members get those houses. It's a good gesture. But there's no fairness in the allocation of the state-sponsored housing. They are small, and of course, they are called starter packs. At least you can always, when you improve in life, you can always extend that particular house. And of course, government cannot be able to build houses for everyone at the rate at which we expect. And of course, we have little to say about the size and the shape of a house. But what is wrong when this is communicated, discussed with us, be allowed to have a say? Of course, not everything we say will be endorsed, passed. But what is wrong with us engaging our government meaningfully? Remember, we are not a political party. We wonder why the government is so afraid of us. There comes election next year. We're not saying, vote for Abahlali. No. We are saying change is possible even from outside. Government must be responsive. Government must be seen as an agent of change. The state must be used to advance the interests of its population.
Why are you not a political party? Why don't you change to be a party?
Well,
and challenge the ANC.
There's a lot of political parties already in South Africa. A lot.
Do you guys support another party?
Well, sometimes we do that. From time to time, the movement takes a particular position. So right now we are in discussion about the next year's election, what form of strategy we are going to use. But there was a time where we strengthened the opposition party.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't too good, really.
Why?
The ANC was very angry about that because it has always claimed to own us it owns the poor and the working class. Now, the poor and the working class, when they reject that, it was really terrible. That's when some of the attack came about. I remember one of the senior government member telling me and warning me actually, and said, now, Sbu, that you have taken this political position, you must face the consequences of that. And what followed after that? Abahlali were killed, violence, without any protection from the state, because it came from the state. And we were facing the consequences of that.
Would you ever consider becoming a politician yourself?
Not really. Politicians are now viewed as people with no heart. And I am afraid if I were to become one, I must start going to a lie college, lie to people, and be dishonest and humiliate people. So it's no longer
it's not a rule that you need to become a lying politician. I mean, just like Bernie Sanders, like he's famous for his integrity. Like he mostly stayed true to his values and principles. So it is possible. You could be the difference.
Of course.
And somehow, as you sit here for the last 2.5 hours, you sound like a politician. Practically, you are a politician. You don't just, but you don't head a party. You don't run for office. But in a way, you are a political person, a politician. Right?
Of course, I cannot deny that the problems that we're facing are political. The question of land is the political question. So there's a thin line that divides, of course, what we do, which is activism, and the work that politicians do. So, but I am not a politician, and I don't think I'll be the one. Of course, people are people. They are good people with integrity. But I'm saying the image and the reputation of politicians have been vandalized by many politicians. This is not to suggest that they aren't good politicians. They are good politicians with good intention, good heart. But unfortunately, they are not doing good work for us to see that they are doing all they can to stop money meant for public goods use from being stolen. You don't do that.
I mean, I can imagine part of our audience will tell Hans to tell you, like, you should go into the ANC. You should change it from within and show these dangerous people how it is done.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have tried that and they failed. So I'm not.
But earlier you said resignation is not an option. So maybe at least you need to try again, and at some point, somebody will be successful.
Yes, no, of course. And we believe that the people of South Africa are now realizing. And we are seeing a lot of really change in terms of the thinking of people, in terms of how they've been viewing voting. But the other thing that needs to be said, a lot of people were not voting. The last time an overwhelming majority voted was in 1994. Mm-hmm. Voting for Nelson Mandela.
The first free election.
The first free election. Then after that, people are just say, well, even those who have voted, they don't see benefits of voting. What's the point of voting? You have no say. So people are really disillusioned. People are hopeless. But we are now engaging again in the campaign of voter education, but also encouraging people to register to vote and at least stand an opportunity to vote when they feel like. So they should not be bad by the fact that they did not register to vote in the first place. So we will be embarking on the voter education drive because people are just fed up, people are just tired. But of course, we're trying to restore the value of voting that because we believe in democracy, we are Democrats, so it's important that we do something about our situation. We can't just give up. Mm-hmm. Hyenas will take over and start eating the goats as they always do.
I have a few questions left until Hans is going to come with the audience question. Is the Czech dwellers movement of yours, is it a black movement, or do you also have like white members?
Well, by virtue of being African in South Africa, the majority of our members are black, but our membership is open to any race. Remember, the apartheid we talked about, segregation remains. They are poor folks, but I guess they will be shy. And of course, they are not even living in our township because of the continuous segregation. Even if they want to, we are still far apart. So our membership is very open to every human being. We have white folks supporting our movement, contributing to everything that is possible for a better world. In our movement, we have other races, we have different ethnic groups. We do not, we reject any racism, sexism, we reject any form of oppression, whether against LGBTIQ plus communities, against any form. For us, human being was created in the image of God and ought to be treated as such. So we are against any form of prejudice. And we have been leading a fight against xenophobia in our own country that has become another cancer that needs to be eradicated. So we are aware of the cycle of violence that manifests itself in different forms. And we have risked our life to protect people who were born in other countries during the scourge of such violence. And we think acting in solidarity and in protection of human flourishing is a just cause. You don't have to be trained for that. It's an ethical and moral question we ought to rally behind.
Do the Czechs of Kennedy Road, where you once lived for many years, where you became a leader, do they still exist?
Yes,
Are there
a
still,
lot.
Are there still Czechs?
More than that I left. Not even doubled, maybe tripled.
Even more now.
Even more now. Because there is no plan whatsoever to house them. There is no political will to do something about it. There's a lot of urbanization and migration. People continue to come into cities. There is no plan for a city's infrastructure to grow, to be maintained, to allow a growing city. There's no plan for that. It's crazy right now. The UN uses that the conditions in slums are life-threatening. And this is what we are confronted with every day.
Are you still visiting Kennedy Road every once in a while?
Oh, yeah.
Go back to the roots?
Oh, yeah, I do. In fact, I get a number of calls. In fact, people realize that when I was still there, things were better than they are now.
Really?
Yeah. It's worse now. People have no one to report to. Nobody command respect.
Are there no democratic elected leaders of Kennedy Road?
Not anymore.
Why not?
No,
Is the powerful man back?
The powerful man is no longer there, so it's chaotic. Those who were ANC who thought they could take over, actually they didn't have what it takes. They have no respect for community, and the community does not respect them. So everyone is like in charge when there are good things coming. When they have to take responsibility for something, suddenly there's no leadership. Suddenly I'm not in charge. So Kennedy Road has become now really a place for even criminal elements enjoying a lack of accountability. So if the police come and looking for a criminal, suddenly nobody knows. So I don't know. Even those that are in leadership. But when good things come, when somebody is looking for somebody for a job, suddenly we are all in charge. That's the kind of community it has become. And shacks are getting banned almost every month.
Banned?
Banned, sometimes 2 times, 3 times a month. There's always shack fire. It is a neglected community that politicians hate. But during the voting times, you'll see them going and rallying because they have left people in such conditions so that Kennedy Road becomes the bank of votes. Mm-hmm. You know, when a desperate person who's hungry, who have no job, absolutely nothing, with the small packet of food, then they agree to everything. That's the politics of stomach. In order to control somebody, make them hungry so that they can always say, yes, boss, yes, boss. That's what the ANC is doing to its black, poor population. We are living on grants, we are living on hands out so that we could easily be controlled. You know, an empty stomach tend to consent to everything. We live like beggars in our own country. In a rich country, by the way. South Africa is rich. It has all mineral resources. This high rate of unemployment, high rate of poverty. Why is that possible? We export, but we are hungry.
In the end, is your mom still alive?
Yes.
What does she say about your political activism?
Well, she's amazed. She just can't believe what I have become. She's just sometimes don't feel like she gave birth to me because I have suddenly become this person. But let me tell you, we are very humble people. Organization has set of values, but we take firm position in society because we want to reflect the kind of society that we want to build now. The society that we are struggling for should not come one day. It has to be reflected in me right now. That's the kind of change.
Be the change you want to see.
Exactly. We strive for that. That is why we are very humbled, but very firm at the same time.
Is Mama still working?
No, she's no longer working. The son has grown up. The son is making noise all over the world.
Is she worried about you?
Of course. But she sees this kind of work as a calling. And at some point, she's right. I don't remember choosing to do what I do. I've never chosen it. I've already told you what career I pursued. Which
being a
didn't
lawyer.
work out. Yeah. But look at me. Where I am lawyering now. But maybe it was a mysterious plan. Because as a lawyer, well, maybe I'll be chasing corporations and representing people and do the same mistake and do not care for the poor and the working class.
I mean, now you're a lawyer, an attorney of the poor.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Proudly so.
And you defend their interest.
I do, with all my ability.
Sabu, thank you so much for being here. That was very interesting. Let's see what Hans has to say, what our audience thought of it and what they want to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I am very humbled and grateful. Thanks to you and thanks to your audience as well who are listening out there. I don't take this opportunity for granted. I really appreciate the moment.
Stay seated. Hans is coming now.
Hi again. The audience was quite interested in what you had to say. I guess they took it as, let's say, a 2.5 long lecture on the situation in South Africa and the relations between South Africa, other African countries and nations, and also Europe. So that was a worldwide lecture they got. And we had kind of a lively discussion. Some questions, most of them came in German. I translated it to kind of broken English. I hope we don't get lost too much in translation. I would like to start with a quote from you. You gave a speech in the year 2005 on Nelson Mandela, and you did something remarkable, which is still unforgotten, I guess, today. You mentioned 3 Nelson Mandelas. Can you repeat and explain what you said then?
Well, this statement came out of deep anger, but also appreciation. I considered Nelson Mandela as our first Jesus Christ, a first man that went to prison for 27 years for us to be freed, not only as South Africans, but as African people. We recognize and acknowledge, we salute that courage.
And you even named Jesus Christ the first Nelson Mandela,
yes.
That way round.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course, Nelson Mandela has been the second Jesus Christ. Because we are told, of course, in the Bible that Jesus Christ died for our sins. That makes him our savior, the first Jesus Christ. Of course, Nelson Mandela becomes the second one. But I said there's another third Nelson Mandela, which is not myself. It is the people of the world who have to suffer for others. They are struggling all over the world. They are oppressed all over the world. Not that they are doing nothing about the oppression. They continue to struggle for a better society.
So the third Nelson Mandela is kind of a collective person.
A collective people of the world who are struggling for a better society. And are those who are saying another world is possible, another world is necessary, who are doing something about poverty, inequalities and injustices.
That's a huge comparison. Did it just come to your mind, or was it a developed idea? How did that come? I know that's about nearly 20 years ago, and you still find that quote in articles and in every report on you find this quote.
Well, at the time when it came, I was distressed. I went through trauma, pain. It was at the time when Abahlali comrades were arrested and we had nobody to turn to. It was at the point when we realized that we are on our own as impoverished, marginalized communities. It was at a turning point where I was reminded that actually what I was doing was playing with fire. In fact, I didn't know that what I was doing along with others was politicking. Somebody said to me when I saw the headlines of the newspaper the following day, you know what you are doing? You are playing with fire. You know what you are doing? It's politicking. I was not even aware that I was politicking. And people are saying today, I speak like a politician. I've never wanted, I've never intended. And I thought I was speaking truth to power. And for me, it was a question of justice out of humanity. You know, as human beings, we have values as we grow in families. In an African culture, there is a famous say that umuntu ungumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person by other persons. It means your humanity is not complete in isolation to others. A human being is defined in relation to others. You cannot be an isolated, complete human being without others.
Human being is a social being. Questions from the audience. There are some, again, on the shacks. They wanted to know, you mentioned that the one shack, you remember that was 2 by 2 meters or 3 by 3 meters. Is it still the regular size of these shacks nowadays, or do they differ more?
Well, it's still in the regular size. However, people have become very clever as we continue to occupy vacant and unused land. And then when people still have a bigger land, and then they make their shacks much more bigger. And it is unfortunate that nowadays there are also shack lots, people who just occupy land because they want to sell to others. And we are against shacklordism. We are against the sale of land. In fact, we are calling for a decommodification of land. Land should be used as public goods. Anyone should have access to land. It should not be commodified.
Do you have to pay taxes?
Unfortunately not. That is why it is...
You say unfortunately not.
Well, no, I'm saying no. People are not paying any tax because obviously it's unregulated.
Yeah.
Government does not receive anything, which is why we are against that form of people building shacks in order to make profit when they're actually not paying tax for that. It is just immoral.
What's development policy is a big issue in Germany and other European states, also in the US. What's your opinion on what previously had been called development aid, and nowadays it's called or relabeled development cooperation? Is it to South Africa and other African states, is it a new lever for cultural hegemonia or economical exploitation, or is it something good at the end of the day?
Well, it is two ways. The language has also been sponsored to steal. So let me start with the bad part of it. When it sounds like development, so then it pretends as if it's intending good. But we also know that it is not always good. Development and cooperation is another fancy word that means another exploitation. So it both ways, but then it depends on those agreements that are not done democratically. Of course, they may be seen on cameras, but it may not be exactly what we get told publicly, what gets written. So it's a good language, positive, but we also know that the system has stolen good progressive language from the working class people. So when you hear the word development, it has actually meant destruction in our countries.
Is it still the same now?
It is still the same now. Only languages change. But oppression, colonialism, and apartheid remains intact.
There were Christians who know that China has become, during the last 2 decades, the most relevant player in the development and trade politics to Africa. And some say, China is doing better because they are doing trade. They are doing fair deals. And other ones say, China sets the rule, they are the bosses, and they set a new level of exploitation to Africa. What's your point of view on that?
Well, China has not demonstrated, at least to ordinary South Africans, its intention. It is the bilateral at the government level, the government that we think is smart. We've had government who have been exploited, who have allowed exploitation, who have allowed theft in their countries. So we cannot be certain about those bilateral at the state level. However, what we know in reality in our communities, where there are Chinese businesses, African people are exploited. This is what we know. We don't know what it means to government. But for us, although they build those shops, those malls, those businesses, but the reality is that African people on the ground in these businesses
They pay quite low wages, as far as I know.
Yes, they pay very low wages that you cannot report anywhere. I'm not too sure if the government is really concerned really about the rights of people, whether they follow labor relations laws. I doubt they do so. We also know that, of course, they build bridges. They have the technology that we need. We hear, of course, their contribution at the government level. The reality is that all of this concerns the people of South Africa. If they are not informed, they are not engaged, we have no reason to believe that China is there to rescue Africa and South Africa.
Some people, sorry to interrupt, some people say China is popular among certain African governments because they don't care much about democracy and these things. They say, okay, you go your own way, you do what you want to do, we wouldn't interfere, which makes it comfortable for non-democratic structures. Is that true?
That is true, in my own opinion. I mean, this is my personal view. It's not a view of the organization. Yeah. That is true to a certain degree. So a lot of really Chinese businesses are really not just in city centers, but in rural communities. You see building China malls. There are China areas that are named after China now.
Oh, really?
And ordinary people are really worried that is China not taking over from us? So you can see the point of view of ordinary people. We're not seeing China as coming to rescue our economy, to help us. It's worrying ordinary South African than to actually see goods coming. But we know somebody benefits out of that. Sure. And that is not the people of South Africa. Yeah. Individuals at government levels.
Talking about your movement, there was a question, is there anything which ordinary people or institutions in Germany can do to support your movement and your intentions?
Well, Abahlali are seeking for support and solidarity. And that support would be to speak out against oppression, to speak out against neo-policies that are harmful to citizens. We want our voice to be heard. We want our voice to be protected, because once the voice has become loud as it has become in Abahlali, we are becoming threats and therefore subjected to all sort of oppression and killing. But what they use to justify killing Abahlali, they say Abahlali is funded by foreign agencies who are now want to destabilize our hard-won democracy. Now, international communities will actually help us to fight against apartheid when they have to again fight against the neo-oppression. They are now referred as foreign agencies who really want to destabilize our hard-won democracy. Even our justice system is under attack in South Africa. You hear the state saying...
Who is attacking it?
I mean, the ANC government. Yeah. In my city, in Durban, you hear the authorities saying, but the court cannot tell us how to run the country. If they lose in court, they act in full violation of the court orders by saying the court cannot tell us what to do. So you want to be law unto yourselves. The law is made for the poor, is not made for you. That is very strange. So, of course, we are seeking for solidarity, real solidarity. People are being killed in the so-called democracy in the name of development. And this is not acceptable. We are interconnected. An oppression in South Africa is an oppression in Germany. It should not be allowed. Undemocratic behavior of the state should be condemned in all corners.
The first point probably should be that our society should just be aware of these facts at the first step, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Comparing the development financially, economically, politically in Asian countries to African countries. There were some who said, now look, the Asian countries who had been not very developed half a century or a century ago, obviously they are doing better than many of the African countries. Do you share this point of view? And if so, what would be the reason for that?
Well, although I'm not an economist and I haven't really traveled much, understood the Asians' development levels and pace of advancement, but there's a truth in certain degree to that. What we are seeing in South Africa, obviously, is self-enrichment. That potential that could make South Africa a better place economically, socially, is being vandalized every day. So there is a potential, given that we have these mineral resources, which are often exported, and we have to buy what we own. Surely South Africa has a room for improvement. Surely South Africa has all what it takes to be a better economics in the world.
There is I have to put that in here, because one wrote, Africa is pretty rich, but quite often African people's money is kept in Swiss bank accounts, correct?
It is correct, but it is also kept here in Europe and other continents.
Sure. Yeah, it's not only Switzerland.
Yeah.
A Western point of view seems to be to provide Africa humanitarian aid. Very often this help or cooperation is in the end to the benefit of Western economies. How is this mechanism, this structure seen in South Africa?
Well, I think South Africans are aware of the so-called aid. Actually, there's nothing called aid. When money is transferred from the global north to the global south, it's actually the money that was taken from the global south.
Well, sometimes aid is, it's named aid when we are talking about, let's say, crises like starvation, etc., etc. Then you see the UN, the World Food Program, aid, and so. So this is, you might call that aid because it's just to make people survive their daily lives. But again, this very often is to the benefit of Western enterprises, isn't it?
Yes, so absolutely. There's truth in that. So we are producers of many food material, for instance, but we are starving. That doesn't make sense. So, of course, there's a need for aid during the humanitarian crisis. Always, aid would always be needed, whether it comes from north to south or south to north or from the UN. But the fact remains that that aid is as a result of sweat and hard work of the working class people. Sometimes it is aid and it's the same people who are now suffering who had actually produced the so-called aid. And it is returned back to those who actually made that aid possible in the first place.
There were some questions on apartheid, which is, one could say this expression is historically related to South Africa. And nowadays, recently, apartheid has been labeled to criticize the situation in Palestine. And there is a debate. Is it correct to call the situation there, the oppression of Palestinians by the Israeli government? Is it correct to call and compare that to apartheid from your point of view?
It is correct in many ways. First of all, when a country invades and occupies another country, and then subject its people, its women and children, to concentration camp, deny them their right to decide on the destination of its own country.
By concentration camp, you mean Gaza in general?
Yes, absolutely. So we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. I must say that not only yesterday, because of the sudden Hamas reaction, the war is old. The war should have been condemned as early as like 1948. So what will bring about peace in that territory is justice. Those who steal land from others. We are at the situation we are in because somebody decided to occupy another land of another state. Why was that allowed? That so many lives have been lost. So when we comment on this question, it must not just be because of what happened last week, as if we do not know the history that brought the situation that we are in. But of course, any loss of life in any other site.
There's a statement, an official statement of your organization, which was released yesterday or 2 days ago, which said, yes, what Hamas did was a crime. It's unacceptable. But the reaction of Israel to Gaza is even more of a crime. That's the opinion you share?
Yes, absolutely. We are saying killing of any life is unacceptable and it should be condemned as it is. No matter what the circumstances. Loss of life in this fashion is completely abhorring and should not be allowed. However, in that particular scenario, that war, there's a history that we should not ignore that has led to this particular situation. The world had all the powers, the resources to stop it. We had a United Nations. Before the Second World War, we had the League of Nations. Because it failed, there was a Second World War. Then we had the United Nations. Why is it not acting to bring about peace? Why does it have to wait?
Well, if we would go back to history, then one would have to say that the United Nations plan for the two-state solution in Palestine from 1947 was not accepted by 5 Arab states who attacked Israel with the aim to not to allow any Israel state to exist. So that would be the position. I'm just bringing that in because that's part of the history.
Yes, I get that, but I mean the point is the primary task of the United Nations is to be a peacekeeping body. And I am saying from where we are sitting, as the world is globalizing in the manner that involves military, then it makes one doubt whether or not the UN has what it takes to keep peace, irregardless of.
So you would say on the question, the tragedy of the region of the Near East, as we call it, the United Nations are failing, have failed and are failing?
Of course, when lives are lost, then we ask what's the point? We think they have power, they have muscles, they have what it takes. And we are saying the only solution, of course, is not war, it's not military, but it's justice. We want to see those efforts, the UN exploring, even an independent jury if it doesn't have what it takes. Let the world, let the rule of law, of course, there are international laws. There's a criminal court in Hague, the ICC. Why are those institutions not brought in because we may not be in a position of who is right or wrong. But it would not harm for people to explore. Now that it is in public domain and we all have to comment about it, and there are people who knows the truth, why we have come to the position where we are.
South Africa has a long history in searching for truth.
Exactly, but because we're struggling for land, and for us, this possession of land is an important element in which justice have to be checked based on.
Mm. There's a question which is in some way related to, let's call it, your relationship to radical movements. The question is, how do you see the EFFs and Julian Malema's approach on the land and housing issues in South Africa? They are, some people know that, they are much more, I would call, in a traditional Leninist way, radical than you are. They are calling for hatred and killing people. That's what they claim for. What's your relationship to that organization?
Well, we don't have any relationship because of the very same stance of a warmonger, a violent stance. Mm-hmm. We think they are radicaling for the nationalization of state resources is a way to go. However, we do not agree with violence. And I think that's one thing that disturbs us along us wanting to associate with such violent utterance of the commander-in-chief. So we worry that if they were to become government tomorrow, then the country is not safe. So it's one thing to be radical, but you can't lose your humanity.
So they are nothing but political enemies to you?
They are not necessarily enemy, but they are just a political party that we do not agree with.
Okay.
And we thought they were on the right trajectory given their radical stance on the question of land.
Yeah. Quite another question. How can we deal with the high level of corruption in South Africa and probably other African states as well? There is corruption. Nobody could deny that. And I've been on short trips, for example, to Nigeria, and you could, even if you're just there for a week, you can see it, you can feel it. People tell you about it, and they call it another form of cancer to this situation. How to deal with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's really a cancer that denies us the right to all the good things that lives should assure us. Well, the first thing is really to have public participation in budget, for public to have a say. We want the policies that allows people to guide their paths. Mm-hmm. For instance, we have I'll make an example about the housing allocation. Yep. There is no housing policy that enables people to participate, to have a say as to who gets the house, where are they built.
So it's kind of an oligarch structure, so to say?
Yes, I mean, this bunch of people decide secretly. So the systems themselves enables corruption. Even the opposition party sitting with them right in the table cannot see corruption because the system that is in place makes it completely impossible for the opposition parties to see how the money gets transferred. They may be part of the decision, but they are not part of the transfer of money.
So this is a claim for transparency and participation,
accountability,
right?
Participation and accountability of non-state players, non-state actors.
I guess this question is one you will like. What's the core reason for the strength of the community in your movement? Is it the common goal, or is it the shared experience, or is it a strong moral conviction? Or is it all three of them?
Oof. It's much more of the moral conviction.
Really? Ah, that's interesting.
Yes. I said earlier on that we don't see ourselves as politicians.
Yeah.
We just thought something was seriously wrong with our society and with our moral grounds, that we can keep quiet when our country, our worlds are falling apart. Surely there's something seriously wrong with us individually, that you cannot do anything. You can just see yourself helpless. So we want to question our morality. So anything else can then follow. It's as easy as the right or wrong.
Yeah.
The question of justice is the question of fairness. Is it right? Is it fair?
In a way related to that, we're coming to the last 2 or 3 questions. In a way related to that is some listeners were quite surprised on your strong links and emphasizing the relevance of the Boy Scout and Girl Scout movements and association. In Germany, they are not that kind of socially relevant anymore. How comes you see it that way, and who is supporting and financing these organizations in South Africa?
Well, there aren't many. And I'm saying it happened. There at school, my former late teacher identified me to join. Remember, as a kid, somebody chooses the right path for you.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I do not regret having been part of that, because it has actually shaped me. Who funds it, I do not know. But it did create strong moral grounds. And leadership training was installed in my vein. It was through that exposure to the Boy Scouts movement. And for me, it meant well, no matter how you analyze it politically, but it created decent men and women for the future. Most importantly, it makes me an active citizen that I am today, because I felt obliged.
So it was kind of a training organization or training camp on becoming a moral personality, a leader, and an active citizen, something like that?
Yes, yeah.
Huh?
That's what it did. It shaped my moral standard.
Would you say this could be transferred to other societies like the German? I don't know if you hard for me to imagine like that, or is it in a very specific way related to your society where you came from?
Well, it's something that really humanity needs, for us to install strong values of humanity. That's what it means for me. Every society, everywhere in the world, we would not be talking about high rate of corruption today, humiliating others, because as a young boy, we actually taught to fear God. In other words, to fear evil and be shameful. You know, if you grow up like that as a kid, surely you become a disciplined somebody of a high moral standing. And I think we don't have much leaders of that statue.
As you say this, to me it becomes even more, I can't understand why a person like Winnie Mandela went the way she went, with that background and with that person, Nelson Mandela, her late husband, who gave her so strong support, etc., etc. Do you have an explanation why, and she's not the only person in the ANC, do you have an explanation why this could happen?
Which direction did she go to?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I sometimes had the feeling that she kind of, maybe it's a hard expression, but she kind of betrayed the heritage of Nelson Mandela. Or am I wrong?
Well, I don't think so. Of course, there may be mixed views, but a lot of people felt she was mistreated as well. Given her long standing in supporting her husband, something went wrong between the couples. Some may be politically linked, some may be just like any other partner, which would be difficult to dig into the relationship of the husband and the wife. We have seen after Winnie has left, and a lot of people, in fact, you see a lot of things that you would not see when a person is still alive. She was hailed as a champion, of course. But before she died, she was humiliated. And but when she passed on, then a lot of good things about her. But surely she had supported her husband for a very long time in a difficult circumstances during the rife, apartheid regime.
So you would say this counts more?
Yeah, well, this is very recent, if there's something like that. And I don't think, she survived all the hardship of apartheid as a leader, a woman, but as a wife to a political prisoner. She survived those storms. Now, when the dust has settled, surely no one is perfect. There are personal issues that, of course, as public figures, we may be judged by, which are not necessarily not part of the political work. This is not to defend.
It's just, you know her so much better than any of us here, and so it's interesting to see your kind of inside view on that. Do you know anything about German politics?
No.
Please don't take that as a rude question.
Yeah, no, not really. But of course, I was interested when I was in school. Of course, during the Cold War, the Berlin Wall.
Berlin,
because it was in our curriculum.
Yeah.
That's how little I know, and much more history than the present. Yeah.
And are you in any way connected to political decisions and issues of the German politics right now, or are you just watching it from far away?
Not really. I am watching from far away. But what I know is that there are good people in Germany who are supporting Abahlali. Some of them are just recently organizing to be the friends of Abahlali because they like what we do. So we haven't really have any connection at the political level. And we prefer to be engaged with grassroots organization and civil society, ordinary people.
There is kind of a political and historical triangle between Germany, South Africa, and Namibia. Namibia had been, as we all know, the German colony in Africa. There had been a suicide, not a suicide, a murder with the Nama and others. And then after that, Namibia had been kind of a colony, so to say, ruled by South Africa for almost 70 years. And Namibia only became an independent state, I guess it was in 1990 or so. And Germany nowadays is still struggling in finding a proper relationship to the Namibian governments and the Herero Nama tribes. How is the relationship from South Africa to Namibia?
Well, I would be lying if I said I knew anything, especially at the state level. And of course, people are people. Our relationship with the people of Namibia, I mean ordinary people, but at the state level, state institutions, really I don't have much history about these connections and the relationship. No.
Okay. Now, indeed, two last questions. There was one which said philosophy is relevant as it kind of determines our construction of the world. Would you know any black or person of color philosopher who is providing a view on the world, especially on the African world, different to the one we are used to? Would you know any name?
Well, of course, there's a couple of them, but one that is much more relevant for our work, who continues to inspire us, who have become a very lived ancestors, would be Frantz Fanon, the French philosopher, who really practiced psychiatry, but who also went to war and who was really engaged in the freedom of the enslaved African people. But one of the quotes, if I can say, that he said was, I quote, "Each generation must, out of obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it." And close quote. And what we are doing as this current generation, because we do not know the answer, we are keep looking for what would be right for this generation, at least for us. And by doing that, we're actually discovering our mission, and we have done so. Now we are in the process of whether we are betraying it or...
This is not decided yet.
Well, it has been decided. We have discovered the mission.
Okay.
Yes.
What about Akile Mbembe? He's not a philosopher, but a historian. He's from Cameroon, and he's lecturing, as far as I know, in South Africa. Is he a relevant figure in the political and philosophical and historical discourse?
I have not, unfortunately, studied Akile Mbembe, but of course, a lot of people really praise his work, and some people do say some of the things that he's written about is most relevant for the work that we continue to do.
The very last person to mention is, I guess you know who Sixto Rodriguez was, Sugar Man, Searching for Sugar Man. That was a most famous documentary on a musician, a US-American musician, had been kind of disappeared from the world stage, but had, during the apartheid time in the 1970s, had been kind of a hidden hero in South Africa. His music, he had been absolutely forgotten in the USA, but I understood, and there had been an Oscar-awarded documentary on him, had been kind of hymnic acceptance in the South African youth in the 1970s. Obviously, he was a little bit like what they called an alternative Bob Dylan or Jimi Hendrix. Do you remember that? Have you been in any way involved in that, or is that just Hollywood?
Well, I don't remember it, but what I can say, the arts and music plays a very important role in our movement. It's part of our movement and organizing. Broadly, it's much more, I think, in African culture, because we are still new activists as the apartheid ended not so long ago. So we have a lot of traditional music in our movement, which keeps us going in the midst of violence and the difficulties. There is an Abahlali choir, for instance, that expresses its feeling, that sends its messages through arts and music. And for us, arts plays a very integral role in our struggle to unite, but also to heal many of the wounds that people have. In our general assemblies, for instance, when we have meetings, you will find people singing. Some will not even say a word throughout the meeting, but what heals them is having been part of the collective and having sang, and with that, they are okay. It lifts their spirit. That's the importance of music and arts in our movement.
In my generation, Miriam Makeba has been one of the heroes, the cultural heroes.
Absolutely.
And best ambassadors of Africa.
Oh, yes, absolutely. She remains in many hearts of many South Africans. She is always remembered.
Spoon, thank you very much for your time, your answers, your lectures you gave us on Africa and South Africa and Africa in general. And we hope to see you again someday. Take our best wishes and support back home. And yes, thank you very much for having been here, being our guest.
Thanks to you for allowing me to share with the German audience. And I want to thank them as well for really taking time to listen to what I have to say. But of course, I just want to call every person of conscience to stand for human rights, wherever and whenever they are. We cannot be silenced when our world is falling apart, when injustice is happening everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Danke euch für eure Fragen, euer Interesse. Ja, es gibt in dem Moment, wo wir den Livestream machen, noch keine deutsche Übersetzung dafür, aber in 1 oder 2 Tagen kann man dann im YouTube-Video bei den Einstellungen automatisch generierte deutsche Untertitel sich anschauen. Die sind nicht immer sprachlich schön, aber man versteht dann doch, wenn man das, was man vorher vielleicht nicht so ganz verstanden hat, man versteht das. Danke nochmal und danke auch für eure Unterstützung, ohne die, ihr wisst es dieses Format nicht gäbe. Bis bald. Tschüss.